Hello everyone. My name's Anthony. I am Anthony Warner. I'm also known as the Angry Chef, and thank you for tuning in. So I'm going to talk today about a few different things. I'm going to talk about my books, especially the new book that's just come out. I'm going to talk a little bit about food pseudoscience generally, and I'm going to talk about sustainable eating perhaps a little bit as well, looking at some of the questions I've already got, and how I deal with trolls on social media. And hopefully I'll always also be getting some questions from you, and so you can I can answer some of them specifically. So I'm going to talk about my books. I wrote this book, which is The Angry Chef: Bad Science and the Truth About Healthy Eating, which I wrote a while ago now. It's also a US version with an extra few words in there, and it's generally a sort of debunking of fad diets, and it's being quite popular. It's certainly sort of become something of a sort of used by people in order to sort of help debunk fad diets, and generally goes through this. First of all, goes through the sort of a number of different fad diets, things like paleo diet and things like that, and alkaline diet and clean eating. And it also sort of looks at some of the psychology of why we're so inclined to fall for pseudoscience in food, especially because that's the thing that I'm interested in. You can spend your entire life debunking fad diets, but unless you understand why people buy into them and why people become sort of convinced by the likes of Gwyneth Paltrow rather than registered dietitians, then you're never going to sort of progress and get anywhere. So I think it's really important to understand the psychology of why these books. This book particularly was kind of all about that. It's all about looking at the pseudoscience. And also, importantly, I am a chef. I am actually a chef, and I felt that it was important to help people take away some of the guilt they have around food, and stop feeling guilty about what they eat, and instead just get back to enjoying food, which and getting pleasure from it, which I think is the most important thing. Is all everything I do in my career has been trying to help people enjoy food a little bit more and feel less guilty about it. So my new book is this one. This is The Truth About Fat, which is out now. It's been out since January. It's generally been pretty well received. It's a different book in many ways. It's reasons why people gain weight, looking at some of the sort of science and what we understand about why people are different weights and why people gain weight, and what happens when people lose weight, and also looking at sort of some of the history of what's been going on there, and history of what's happened with people gaining weight, and really debunks most of the sort of what I consider to be the oversimplifications of what is a deeply complex and systemic problem. There's all sorts of people use obesity as a way of selling people stuff and making people feel guilty about what they eat, and making us feel like we're doing life wrong, and all will come up with products in order to sell to you to help, and all those people are sort of really oversimplifying deeply complex systemic issues. And this book's really a call to help people embrace complexity rather than trying to oversimplify really complex problems, which I think is a problem in society generally, but is especially a problem with this, especially sort of the complex emotional relationship many of us have with food and with our bodies and generally. So this was a book to try and help people just feel a little bit more comfortable with themselves, but also to help people in science need to really embrace complex systems thinking, and look, because that's the only way we ever progress anywhere. Okay, so there's my books, and as I said, both of them are available now. Available in audio books too, if you want them, or on sort of Kindle, and from most sort of book selling websites and that sort of thing. I think they're pretty widely available. So I've been asked a few questions here, which I've got, which I'm going to answer today. But like I said, send some more through. Firstly, I've been asked. Actually, an interesting subject. I've been asked about the EatLancer report, which if anyone doesn't know what that is, recently a group of scientists have released a report through the Lancet, which is discussing sustainable diets and how we should be eating, because obviously there are problems, and as it happens, as part of a writing project I'm doing at the moment, I'm researching a lot about sustainability of food and the environmental impact of our food supply, and it's clear that there are huge problems regarding how our food is supplied, so and how our food is grown, the sort of food we eat, and there's big problems from from a health perspective to an extent, but also particularly and undeniably from an environmental perspective. The impact of ruminant animals on greenhouse gas emissions is sort of it's impossible to deny that the way we eat now and the amount of red meat and beef and lamb we eat right now is perhaps unsustainable. And this report was an attempt to try and address that, an attempt to try 2050, and how are we going to do that without completely destroying the environment. And so there are very serious problems that it's covering, but in reality, my feelings on the report are, I think a lot of the environmental stuff is probably reasonably accurate, and unfortunately, and paints a pretty dark picture. But there have been many other equally informed and reports which have sort of painted very much the same picture, and so I'm inclined to believe that much of the environmental stuff is we have to take it as read. It seems to be the sort of accepted belief of most environmental scientists working today that the way we eat now is probably unsustainable as it is now, and is certainly unsustainable for a growing population and a growing affluent population. So there's huge problems here. My problem with the EatLancer report particularly was that it was it seemed to come from a particular ideology. The group, there have been lots of reports, let's say, that a lot of the people behind the report are sort of vegan activists. I don't know how true that is, but there's certainly many people who are vegan behind the report, and it seemed to me to come from a point of view of taking veganism as a start point, and failing to address any of the perhaps problems with veganism that there are, in terms of being something that we want to sort of roll out to an entire population. And it made various concessions to meat, and it presented this sort of diet, a diet that people should be following, which they say is sustainable, and that diet was just ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. Saying people would eat like 7 grams of beef a day and 7 grams of pork, and I just felt that the way it was communicated was desperately poor. I may not be an expert on the environment, I may not be an expert on nutrition even, but the one thing I think I have a reasonable expertise on is how to communicate these things. I am a science communicator, and I felt it was really poorly communicated and gave people pretty much an open goal and set it up for ridicule. And certainly in this country, it received in the media an awful lot of ridicule as people showed themselves cooking up 7 grams of beef and 7 grams of pork for their dinner, which is obviously not realistic. And there have been many other reports which got far less publicity, from the World Resources Institute or from the World Bank or from the UN or from various different organisations, which, I said, paint a very similar picture of the problems, but also have a slightly more realistic way of how they should be addressed. What the report talked about, the implementation of taxation on meat, and seems to be very in favour of that, which I can't, is not something that I really see any reason to support. My thoughts on any of these sort of food taxes are they're hugely regressive, particularly with meat. The only consequence I can imagine of a tax on meat would be to make people buy cheaper cuts of meat, and probably not to improve their diets at all. And the sort of taxation you'd have to do to try and create that sort of huge, wide-scale behaviour change, I just feel is would be extraordinarily high, and I feel that would pretty much price meat out of reach of people on low incomes, which just made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. It even talked about, the report even talked about how they could use war and conflict as a way of, as an opportunity to encourage people to change their diets. And I just felt, well, I mean, even if that's true, and I'm not sure it is, it's pretty uncomfortable language to be in a report like that. So even though, yeah, the report raised hugely serious issues, I felt it was incredibly poorly communicated. I felt the dietary recommendations were not realistic, and also, the things I know perhaps more about is I do have a degree in science, biochemistry degree, and I do know a little bit about food science and nutrition. The stuff that on the report that covered nutrition was pretty problematic, and took it's like anything. It's from a standpoint of an ideology, and when diet advice has been given out from an ideology, I feel people have a tendency to sort of for bias confirmation and to sort of only see the evidence from one side. So I felt it was a very problematic report on a very serious issue, and I felt there are many other better reports. And if anyone's interested, get in touch with me, and I'll point them towards those better and more sensible and more realistic reports on the same issues. So yeah, because I just feel if people are using the environmental impact of food, which is incredibly serious, as a way of selling an ideology, I think that's a big problem, and there's a danger of sort of pushing people away from those issues. There's something. Okay, just got a question about that from. So yeah, I mean, on the other side, someone's just asked me a question about the carnivore diet, which I guess is the ultimate extreme. I consider those two diets. I mean, the veganism. I mean, most people out there will know some vegans, and it's a fairly extreme diet, but it's many people do it perfectly sensibly. Many people are quite healthy vegans, but carnivore diet is the sort of the ultimate other extreme of that, I suppose. Just eating meat, and I always, when I first started hearing about this diet, I thought it was. I didn't think it was possible that someone would just eat meat as a diet. That seemed extraordinary, but as it seems to be something that's growing in popularity. It seems to be lots of people are doing, and it seems to be lots of a thing that people are embracing, and they're only eating meat apparently, and not drinking water. And I mean, if I'm speaking to dietitians out there, they will know how extreme that is, and how worrying that is, and how unsustainable that is. Not just unsustainable from an environmental point of view, which obviously, if you're just eating meat and getting all your calories from meat, that's not something that the whole planet can do. The planet could not support enough meat production for that to happen. But also just incredibly unhealthy. I mean, there's dangers of nutrient deficiency. There's dangers of things like scurvy, and I can't. It seems an incredibly disordered way to eat. And I suppose it's become a bit of almost a political thing. People are embracing that in order to sort of kind of reject authority and reject what they're told. No one tells me what to do. I will eat this in this extreme way. It's kind of become associated with certain sort of the extreme right of politics as well, to some extent. And I mean, I worry that it is such a prevalent trend, and I question the integrity of the people actually sharing. I don't believe them, to be honest, a lot of the time. And what do you also see? I mean, these tend to be ideologies around these diets, and the carnivore diet particularly. People will verge. And certainly, I've seen the same thing from a lot of people in the low carb, high fat community who tend to embrace eating a lot of diet animal products. They tend to verge on climate change denial sometimes, which just shows how far an ideology will push you. And generally, in sciences, nutrition science and to some extent environmental science has a degree of uncertainty within it. It's not like mathematics or something, and it's not even like you can do something like a drug trial where you can have be pretty sure that something is having a real effect. nutrition has a huge amount of uncertainty. Environmental science has a huge amount of uncertainty. These are complex systems that these things are expressed within, and people exploit that bit of uncertainty and go, yes, the science isn't in yet. People honestly saying, oh yes, the science isn't in on climate change. That's just ridiculous. But people who buy into these dietary ideologies will often sort of believe that. So it's extremely problematic from both sides. There are both sides of extremes dominating the debate, and I think we see that a lot certainly see it a lot in the UK in politics. The extremes at the moment, we're at a point where extremes on each side are dominating the debate. So who's dominating the debate about climate change? It's carnivores and vegan activists. Whereas we should be looking sort of perhaps in a more moderate middle for real answers. Yeah, another question here. I've got some pushback on my current book. Is it because I'm a chef writing a book about nutrition, or because my views, or are these people just trolls? And how do I deal with the people that attack me? Yeah, I had some pushback on my current book. I have had some pushback on my current book, but I've also had a lot of a very good reception from other quarters. It's always a challenging book to write. It's a complex and emotive subject, and what I'm trying to do is get people away from oversimplifying things and get people away from presenting simple solutions to deeply complex problems. And when you're doing that, you kind of expose, I kind of attack all sides. So every single diet that is out there, or every single solution to the problem of lifestyle diseases that people put out there, I sort of push back at all of them, and I don't leave any of them without criticism. And so I forget really sometimes that I'm kind of criticizing everybody, and I'm kind of often criticizing a lot of people's inherent beliefs about things, and these beliefs are very much or just someone who says, who has this sort of simple narrative that it's all about processed food, or the simple narrative that it's all about fat, or it's all about carbs, or it's all about the obesogenic environment. Certainly, my book tends to sort of reject all of those as being absolutely true. So I do upset a lot of people. I had one very bad review in a newspaper, which was interesting. Probably the first one of my books that's been badly reviewed in national press. But at the same time, it was very well reviewed in a couple of other newspapers and in Nature as well. So I take Nature over UK press, to be honest. I think if I had written a book that everyone liked, it wouldn't have been a great book. It's always going to be a little bit divisive, and I think that's a sign that you're doing something interesting. Is that you are sort of creating an emotional reaction in people, because these are serious, complex issues, and so I think it's quite important to do that. Are these people just some people who do write stuff about me? Well, are they just trolls? I don't know. Some people aren't. Obviously, I was reading a newspaper by a serious writer who I've had various disagreements with, but there are. Anyone who writes about food and diet will know how incredibly emotive it is, and how people do react so viscerally to just talking about what people eat, which is extraordinary, really. People have very much got to a point where they define themselves very much by their diet, and define themselves very much by what they eat, and particularly define themselves about what they don't eat and what they exclude from their diet. Know that all these things have been part of people's identity and part of religious identities for years. These days, dietary exclusion has become people's identity. It's become the thing that defines people. And when something defines somebody, they are, it's so much tied to who they are, that to criticize that is to criticize them. So to say to them, no, you've got that slightly wrong, you're oversimplifying a complex problem, you're saying, you're attacking their identity, and that's why people have such a reaction to it. And I'm lucky, I suppose, in that I have sort of quite a forthright writing style and a particular identity on social media, which makes it quite easy for me to deflect criticisms, and the people are a little bit, perhaps a little bit intimidated by my persona that I write in and that I have on social media. So I tend to avoid a lot of the criticism, and I never ever block anyone. So I don't block anyone on social media. And there's no problem if you want to block people on social media. That's a good thing. And the block button is very useful for a lot of people. For me, I don't like to sort of. I like to have myself open up to, because I've been engagement and arguments are important, and we never get anywhere if we don't argue with anyone. And it's just arguing in the right way. But when there are, the trolls that I see, the really bad ones, they tend to leave me alone. Because after a short time, they have a go sometimes. I have a few that come up, especially from the low carb crowd. They seem to be the worst. I used to have quite a few vegan ones. But the low carb ones seem to be particularly bad, and the carnival ones as well. They seem pretty bad. And I just, I will engage them to an extent, and then eventually I just ignore them and leave them shouting into the void. Where if it turns out they're just ridiculous and not listening, they're just wanting a fight. But it can be quite a dark place for people writing about nutrition and diet. I'm lucky in that I have this persona that I've created, but also I'm lucky in that I'm to be honest with you, I'm lucky that I'm male, because the women and that I know who write about these things and communicate about these things can just get some really vicious attacks and really worrying and horrible. That seems absurd. When we're just talking about diet, but like I said, these things are people's identity, and there are many people who don't like being told they're wrong, and there are many men who particularly don't like being told they're wrong by women, especially women who are intelligent, outspoken, and well qualified. And that's just an unfortunate part of life. And for those people, I can only recommend just being careful what information you share on social media, and blocking people when you have to, and reporting them when you have to. It is very strange world in food. So I've got another question. So should dietitians speak up more about misinformation? So this is something I'm asked a lot. So I do a lot of speaking to dietitians in different countries, actually. And dietitians have been enormously supportive of the work that I do and the writing that I do, because I think probably because I say the stuff that sometimes they want to say, and I can get away with perhaps being a bit more aggressive in that I'm not a healthcare professional. I think dietitians should speak up about misinformation. I think that is important, but it's not dietitians' main role, certainly. And I think one thing that dietitians, I don't know what it's like in the US so much, but certainly in the UK, I think the dietitians, and in Ireland actually, where I've done a lot of speaking to dietitians as well, dietitians get a really bad rap in the media. That they're not not an enormously respected profession, and that perhaps underlines becomes difficult for them to speak out. I think I say this, people have this strange impression of what they think dietitians do, which is very much not like the actual role of dietitians. It's I think they imagine that dietitians sit around in a room telling people that they can't, deciding that the public shouldn't eat biscuits. And whereas most dietitians are obviously working clinically, and they're doing, they're sort of seriously and extremely valued healthcare professionals, but they tend to only be valued in the sort of environments they work in. They don't tend to be valued externally, and perhaps that's because loads of doctors talking about nutrition now and saying, why aren't doctors need to know about nutrition? Certainly doctors should know more about nutrition, and training in this country is very, very poor in terms of doctors learning about nutrition, but they never seem to say never seems to be saying we should have more dietitians out there. It just seems to be that's I don't know. I just think people don't realise perhaps that dietitians are actually incredibly valuable healthcare professionals who do an extraordinary job. And I think if they did know more about the actual role of what the actual role of a dietitian was, then that there would be more respect for the profession, and then when they spoke up, they would be listened to harder. So I think it's really the dietitians. My call for them is always to sort of say, this is what we do, or just encourage other writers and journalists. And I try to help as much as I can. And I've always been, shouted loud about how we should listen to dietitians on these issues rather than sort of lifestyle nutritionists or celebrities or even sometimes doctors. But we should be encouraging more writers and journalists to share what dietitians do, because unless people haven't come across one, then often there's a real misunderstanding, I think, about the profession and about what people do. Okay, so I think that's getting towards the end. If anyone's got any more questions, just type them through in the next couple of minutes or so. But like I said, I a number of books which I will go through again. So this is my first book. This is the US version of it, and that's Bad Science and Truth About Healthy Eating, which is been out for a while, but it's a debunking of fad diets and a bit of an exploration of the psychology of why we're really inclined to believe in fad diets. And then the new book was out this January and is out in the US and the UK, and is The Truth About Fat, which is about sort of misunderstandings about the sort of the science of why people gain weight and the problems of involved with when people want to lose weight, and why it's so difficult for people, and also just some of the sort of more general societal stuff, and about obesogenic environments, and just about the many misunderstandings about that really complex issue. Okay, so if I've got no more questions, I will wrap up now. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate the opportunity to do this today. And if you have any questions, if you don't have any questions, you can easily contact me. I'm on Twitter, Warren Chef on Twitter, and you can go to my website, Chef, which has a contact page. So if people want to send me an email, you can do that through the contact form or through the email address on that contact page. Okay, thank you all for listening, and good luck with everything you do. And if there are any dietitians in the world need sort of building up and celebrating in the media, then you think there's stories I should hear about what dietitians are doing, just let me know. Thank you very much.